because homelessness is one of California's most pressing, if not the most pressing humanitarian crises that we have. And there is a lot of work being done and still a lot of work yet to do. And it's important that we are as transparent as possible about what's happening, what's being done, and what it looks like in the look ahead. So we want to give a report out on the progress of our 2020 to 2025 community plan to end homelessness. And then we will have a panel discussion with Ragan, Consuelo, Preston, and Claudine. But before we jump into that, I'm going to ask Consuelo Hernández, who's the the director of the Office of Supportive Housing, to give us an overview on the community plan progress so far.
Thanks, Jen, and good afternoon, everybody. Consuelo Hernández, director with the Office of Supportive Housing. You can believe it, it's been 2 years, and it's been a crazy ride. So just to ground you, for those of you that haven't been tracking or following our work, the Community Plan to End Homelessness is our roadmap to ensuring a safe and stable home for all, and it details the collective action needed to address these systemic factors. The plan was developed with input from over 8,000 participants, and we started to launch the endorsement of it during the pandemic, despite a lot of us being called to action as disaster service workers to respond to the pandemic. The plan is built on 3 core strategies, and there's 3 metrics that I'll talk about next in terms of how we are tracking that. The first strategy and the second strategy are really rooted in addressing homelessness directly by addressing the root causes of homelessness through system and policy change. So for this, think about land use changes to make the development of housing faster and more affordable. Think about our safety net system and the gaps that exist there. And sometimes it's a function of departments talking to each other or collaborating. The second strategy is to expand homelessness prevention and housing programs to meet the need of people. We've been really working on this area because you're tackling the people that are homeless, but also those new folks that are becoming homeless at the same time. And then the third strategy is focused on improving the quality of life for unsheltered individuals and create healthy neighborhoods for all. And what this means is looking at basic services. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of great work coming from the city of San Jose, specifically in providing hand washing stations and toilets, trash pickup, really to address the fact that people, when they are living in an encampment, how do we maintain those areas clean, but also bring basic services to people where they are. All of this is rooted in 2 core themes. One is to raise the voices of those with lived experience and to look at the racial and disparities in the community and be very intentional about addressing those through our work. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are looking at how we track our progress is through 3 specific metrics. So since the start of the plan, January 2020 through December 2021, of our goal of housing 20,000 people, and so this number is inclusive. So say in my family, there's 2 people, and if both of us were homeless, then 2 of us would be housed. That's how we count this number. So to date, we've housed 5,941 total people housed, again, through December. And I just wanted to share a little bit more detail here about how people are housed. People are housed either through a permanent supportive housing unit. This is one of the units that we're building through Measure A, or in the regular marketplace, like any one of us that rents an apartment. Our system provides rental assistance so that people can afford the rent. For those that need minimal intervention, sometimes all it takes is light case management, financial assistance to get them in their own apartment, and then they're able to take on the rent on their own, and we link them to different services. So people get housed through different programs. Next slide, please. The other goal, or the way that we're tracking our progress, is by expanding the homelessness prevention system. In 2015, the Board of Supervisors, along with a number of partners and representatives from the business community, different council members, nonprofits, those with lived experience, called for a pilot homelessness prevention system. And the idea, this was one of the outcomes and recommendations of that housing task force, was to look at prevention. And through our work, we always analyze and evaluate the progress of our work to make sure that if it's not properly addressing the systemic changes, that we pivot and we make small adjustments. So to date, our progress is 2,140, and where we started in terms of a baseline is 1,540. What that really means is these are programs that are at the level of 1,500 or so. And in order to achieve our goal, we need to sustain a budget in this system to house annually 2,500, to provide homelessness prevention services to 2,500 households a year. Next slide. The third metric is doubling our temporary housing and shelter capacity to reduce the number of people sleeping outside. When the pandemic hit, our numbers, we had minor temporary changes in the capacity in our shelters, and that was primarily due to the CDC recommendations of increasing distance between bed, but also just to make sure that people were safe and we were able to maintain the facilities open. So during this time, we also opened temporary motels to make up the loss in beds. Through the city's leadership, through a program in partnership with the Housing Authority and the county, we're also able to open interim housing sites, emergency interim housing, and bridge housing, but we still have a long way to go in this goal. We've been actively pursuing home key and different ways of finding innovative solutions to building temporary housing. Next slide, please. And this metric is a little complicated unless you're part of the system and understand. One of the goals that we are trying to do in our efforts isn't just to house the people that are homeless now, but it's really looking at the root causes of why people become homeless and attacking the issue before they face that crisis or they become homeless. And what we aim to achieve is a 30% reduction in the annual inflow. So what this means is that we are working homelessness prevention, we have housing problem solving, in addition to all of our efforts to permanently house people. So our goal was to achieve a 30% reduction, which means 3,345 people. We have surpassed that goal, but that doesn't mean that our work is over. And if we can go to the next slide, I will show you what that means. So the red bars here show the number of people annually that become homeless. So you can see that this number is going down, and our housing placements have stayed pretty steady. When we launched or when we released this report, we were seeing that approximately for every household that we served, 3 new households were becoming homeless. Currently, that number is 1.6 people becoming homeless for every one. This means that the work that we're doing to prevent homelessness and our housing placements, building new housing, really looking at every front to help people is working. I'll hand it over back to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thanks, Consuelo. Before we jump into the panel, I wanted to say 2 things. One, in your bottom right corner of your monitor, you should see a tab that says Q&A. So if you have questions that you'd like us to answer at the end, please put them in. And then the other is just to note that this, while we are giving an update about the community plan, this is really a view from the system, meaning these are the entities that are responsible for the system of care, whether it's production or services or what have you. It is not meant to be inclusive of all of the amazing service providers. I see lots of you here and all of the work that you are doing on the ground. This update is not in any way trying to minimize that body of work, but really it's about us showing responsibility to the system of care, both in how things are funded, how things are tracked, and how we are doing together. So no further ado, but why don't we jump into the panel? Thanks for removing the screen, Chelsea. And why don't we get started? So we're going to talk about 3 different buckets of work today. I want to start first with housing development, placements, and retention. Consuelo, you just ended on that great slide that shows the work that we still need to do, right? To have to not have more people becoming homeless than are exiting. And the county's Office of Supportive Housing plays a key role in building more deeply affordable and supportive housing. Can you start us off by talking about the work underway implementing the 2016 Measure A bond?
Sure, thank you, Jennifer. One quick data point is that before the housing bond passed in 2016, as a community, we had only built about 230 units of supportive housing. And supportive housing here is broadly characterized as both permanent supportive housing, meaning that somebody needs a permanent rental subsidy and permanent services, and rapid rehousing. And rapid rehousing is basically time-limited service and time-limited subsidy. If we can go to the slides.
And that's pretty compelling, Consuelo. The fact that there were just a couple hundred units not that long ago shows, frankly, that's hugely problematic, right? Given like what we know about who's been homeless here for the last 10 years.
Yes, and we really have a lot of catch up to do. When the market crashed in early 2000s, 2008, it really slowed the pace of development. In 2015, during the same housing task force that I mentioned, the Board of Supervisors allocated about $18 million to our office to start building and ramping up development. This was before the housing bond passed. And with that $18 million, we were able to partner with the city of San Jose to acquire Casa de Novo, what is now known as Casa de Novo, and a few other sites. Renaissance Place, for those of you, it's 2450 Center Road, one of the largest supportive housing project in our community. And I talk a little bit about the power of that partnership to begin with, because it was the foundation. So we took that foundation and have been implementing the work ever since, pivoting and adjusting as we go, because we're always evaluating, right? So we always look at what are the lessons learned. So in 5 years, and for those of you that are in the development world, it takes 5 years on a good day from the time you acquire a piece of property until it's developed. And that's when there's resources. We have one of our developments that took 12 years to build. So had it not been for Measure A, that project wouldn't be built. 64 vulnerable seniors wouldn't be in that building. So today, we have now funded 41 housing developments. 9 of them are open, 7 are scheduled to open later this year. On Monday, we had 2 of the first residents move into IMSC Village. It includes 60 units for previously unhoused veterans. And it's just goes to show how far our partnerships can take us, and why there's still so much work to do. So through this effort, $88 million of the housing bond has been allocated across 8 cities for the construction of 3,721 new apartments. And it's a drop in the bucket. We recognize that. And we are going to see that need increasing. The RENA allocation numbers are coming out. Communities are planning through their housing element, how they're going to address that. And I think the housing bond is a model for that, but we have a long way to go. Next slide, please. This, if you're interested, this shows our progress to date. These are the buildings that are open today. I know some folks did a tour of Quetzal Gardens yesterday, and a beautiful story there is we placed somebody in our interim housing program, and then they moved into Quetzal Gardens. So it's great. 830 units are open, roughly helping about 1,600 people. That includes those that are unhoused and extremely low income. The other effort that I'd like to highlight is our Project Home Key. This is part of the governor's strategy to alleviate and address housing and homelessness across the state. In the first year of its implementation, our community was awarded 3 grants. Hillview Court in the city of Milpitas, the now Casa de Novo in the city of San Jose, and I always forget, Ragan, the name of your hotel that you guys acquired. But 3 of those. And so we as a community stood up and said, okay, Governor, there's a second round of funding coming and we are ready for it. And we put together 8 proposals. So far, Bella Vista Inn is the first one to be funded, but we continue to work with the state and really looking at this amazing body of work that we came together to propose in addressing and accelerating the work. Because again, on a good day, it takes 5 years Through Home Key, we can make this happen in a year. And really, that's I think where we are now, and how do we leverage these opportunities that are coming before us, and how do we do it together?
Thanks, Consuelo. You know, I was one of the people at Quetzal Gardens yesterday and also at Renaissance Place, and reminded again of really just the beauty of these projects. These, if you haven't driven by Quetzal Gardens, for those of you, it's right across the street from the School of Arts and Culture. It is a magnificent building. I'd like to ask Claudine to comment. Claudine, I'm curious to your reaction. When you hear about all this progress, all of these housing units that are being brought online, what is your perspective, especially from as one of our lived experience advisory board members, who's been doing outreach in the camps, who's out on the ground? Does it feel like this progress is happening to you?
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, my reaction, it's one of, I feel like joy and excitement. I actually just ran into a lady that I met at one of our biggest encampments here in Santa Clara County. I ran into her last week, Friday. And she used to live at that encampment, and I asked her where she was now, where her tent was, and she said, "Oh, I'm no longer in a tent. I have my own place now." So that's when I talk about excitement, that's where it comes from, right? Is running into people that got connected to permanent housing through outreach that are now housed, and there's many more of those people to come. So I think that the primary goal of outreach obviously is obtaining housing, and it remains a fact that the solution to homelessness is connecting and pairing people to permanent housing that do not come with conditions and obstacles, right? To make it easy for them to get in and get some safety and security in housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudine. Preston, you are the Santa Clara County Housing Authority's new, meaning in the last year, executive director. And so you have a breadth of experience from running housing authorities across the country. And so, you know, we're fortunate that you chose to come and help us. The Housing Authority here in Santa Clara has been doing something pretty unique. As we've learned from others, this type of partnership isn't commonplace. Can you talk a little bit about how the Housing Authority has been leveraging your resources in partnership with the Office of Supportive Housing to drive more production?
Yeah, I have to say two very quick things. One is that I came here because of this amazing alignment that's happening between the city of San Jose, Santa Clara County, the continuum of care, and the amazing work of Destination Home. So for me, it's really an honor to be part of this. And the second thing I have to say, it's not lost on me with Women's History Month that I am part of a panel with 4 amazing women. And so I think I just did the count wrong. 3 amazing women that is leading this work. So I have to just very quickly talk about the role of the Housing Authority has been really focused on providing a housing choice voucher. And why that is important is that a unit gets built on the capital side from a number of different funding sources, including Measure A and tax credits and other local funds, but it also includes debt. And the Section 8 voucher rental assistance helps a lender get debt. And the second way is when someone moves into a housing unit, their portion of rent is pretty low. What they can pay is pretty low and wouldn't cover operating costs. And with the voucher, it enables the operations to happen at a site. It is for Ragan. I see you again. Sorry about that. And so the importance of the voucher is really important to make sure that these housing developments are sustainable and that they are affordable to the families as they move in, to the people who move in. We have provided commitments to a large number of the vouchers or the large number of the units built through Measure A. And what I think is really important, and Consuelo actually has this number, is just the volume of funding that is coming through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Over the next 20 years, I think that the net present value or the total cost of that is going to be somewhere around $750 million. And so it is a key partner in making these housing developments work. We at the Housing Authority are really committed to continue to work with the county, the city of San Jose, to local communities to really think about how do we continue to support and how do we grow our voucher program so we can continue this to support the growth in the housing development happening in this community. And then we as a housing authority, so it's been through vouchers primarily, but we are stepping into that area of us ourselves becoming a provider of housing, permanent supportive housing. And we submitted our first tax credit application earlier this week for 9% tax credits on a development in the city of San Jose that will have some permanent supportive housing units and ELI units. We have a commitment to serving any new development. 45% of the units serve households making less than 30% of area median income. And we were one of those developments for home key, our applications for home key, and we have a second. And so we're really looking at how do we continue to expand our role within this area.
Thanks, Preston. Ragan, Henninger, I'd like to ask you, so first of all, $750 million from the Housing Authority leveraging federal money. That's almost like doubling Measure A, a lot of money towards Measure A. Ragan, also, the city of San Jose is a key driver in our progress on developing deeply affordable and supportive housing. And the city of San Jose passed Measure E in 2020. See, there's a theme here, right? Like leveraging these different resources towards one goal. Ragan, what has been key in your progress? And also tell us what's been hard.
Thanks, Jen. I think there's two things, well, maybe three, that have been really driving progress in San Jose. I think first, we have policies that prioritize deeply affordable housing for extremely low-income households. It's in our affordable housing investment policy and in our Measure E spending priorities that 45% of our funding will be dedicated to ELI housing. So we're really sending a clear message of what we want and what we expect. And I think another thing that's been driving progress really in a ground game kind of way, day-to-day way, is thanks to our partnership with Destination Home. We have a planner within the city's planning department that's really dedicated to moving affordable housing projects through our planning process and really to implement affordable projects that are taking advantage of the various state streamlining legislations. So for example, PATH's project at 4th and Younger took advantage of AB 2162, and it took just a little over 5 months from initial submittal of their application to issuing their permit. Another example is Charity's Housing's project on Key Street that took advantage of SB 35. And that project took 4 months and 1 week from the time they submitted their application until the time they received their permit. And I think there's also unquantifiable benefit of having a dedicated planner in our city that really benefits developers, where they can go and discuss policies and processes and very specific sites. And that may not be a quantifiable number, but I think it's a real resource for developers. And so, we're really grateful to Destination Home for continuing to fund that planner in the city for another 3 years. And then I would say for what's hard, I would really say the continued cost of construction really has a dramatic impact on affordable housing. And the increased costs have really meant that developments may need to rely on additional funding sources to complete a project. And then on top of that, there's a lot of competitiveness right now in obtaining funding, especially for low-income housing tax credit financing, which has made it even more challenging. So developments may have to apply multiple times before they receive their tax credit award, which really can delay a project over the course of multiple years. And so I think that's really been something that's hard in terms of doing this work.
Does opposition to development play a role in that, or you feel like that is a natural part of the process?
I think opposition definitely plays a part of it. And I think in everything we do, whether we're trying to build a permanent development or we're just trying to open a safe parking space, I think it's all hard and people show up who want to oppose projects. And I think that typically only adds delay, right? Because we're usually have to do more community outreach than what a typical kind of market rate development would have to do.
Right. Let's pivot to prevention. Again, going back to reducing the inflow of people becoming homeless. Consuelo, the pandemic really highlighted how at risk our lowest income residents are. But so far as a county, we've been able to prevent tens of thousands of evictions where we knew they were happening because of the different resources that were available. What was your take on those efforts, and what are you worried about looking ahead?
Thanks, Jen. I'd say that thankfully we had a system in place. So we launched the homelessness prevention system pilot in 2017. And since then we've assisted, and it's not even just a number, right? So we've helped over 8,000 individuals since that time to retain their housing through prevention. But what was really amazing during the pandemic, and I know a lot of us are really tired still, we had 70 nonprofit partners that stepped up and did amazing work during those I think the first 9 months of the pandemic. I mean, our office never closed. We sent maybe 30 people home that are more analysts, but a lot of us were activated as disaster service workers in the trenches with those nonprofits who we didn't know a lot about COVID at that time, right? We were struggling to even find PPE during that time. But our community needed us, and the disparity between the lowest income earners and the higher, it just keeps growing. I mean, I'm very blessed to have weathered the pandemic, financially, but I think what has really been amazing doing this work over the last 2 years is just seeing how we don't give up, right? The people matter that we serve. And that brings me hope because we come together and come up with solutions. So at the start of the pandemic, we launched the first COVID financial assistance program, right? And we learned a lot. I think in the first 24 hours, maybe 12 hours, the funds were depleted or programmed. So we learned that we needed to be more intentional. And then the second phase started, and so forth and so forth. And I think it's being very mindful of the pivots that we have to make and being very intentional. So right now, the tenant protections that are the last bit of tenant protections that are in place are set to expire in March 31st. And that's what keeps me up at night. What are we going to do there? We are partnering with the state in implementing emergency rental assistance, and our local partners have not stopped. Our disaster service workers, the coordination with the city of Mountain View in South County, that coordination doesn't stop. But I think we have to this is the key thing that we need to be mindful of right now, because if we don't watch it closely, if we aren't talking about it every week, we will see that tsunami come. And it's great, people say the courts can only handle so many unlawful detainers and eviction processing, but people leave. People are scared, people are vulnerable, and we need that close-knit partnerships that we've established to make sure we can prevent it. And allow the partners that we have to do what they do best. And as government agency organizations, remove those barriers, right? And do what we do best to help support the nonprofits and the people that we serve. Through this pandemic, I think our county staff, through the Joint Department Operations Center, we've built now a relationship with the community where they call us directly. And I think that, we don't want to lose that. because we hear what they say, we pivot, we reduce the paperwork if it's not needed. And really thinking about the fact that of all of the people that we've helped, 82% of them are extremely low income. And that's who needs our help. So this is why the prevention work is really important. We need to continue to identify funding sources that will increase that beyond the 2,500 goal that we've set for the community plan, looking at the safety net system and how we can work together with them as well. I think that'll be really critical, Jennifer, to avoid the tsunami that is going to come.
Thank you, Consuelo. 2 points. One, for those folks who may not know, extremely low income are households that make between 0 and 30% of area median income. Those are the households that we know become homeless because their incomes are stretched so far to be able to pay for their rent. Family on minimum wage, senior on Social Security, somebody who's disabled. And so that's why there's that focus. And then I also wanted to thank you for really giving so much credit to the nonprofit partners. I will say one of the things that has really been, for me, very sad and very frustrating is hearing people say, oh, nothing's being done, or people aren't doing things. When I know that our partners, and there are so many to name, but just because I know Life Moves, Home First, Family Supportive Housing, Sacred Heart, Health Trust, more are with us today. I watched folks work 16-hour days, 7 days a week, into the middle of the pandemic, delivering food, opening shelters. I've never seen a group of people, and that was in concert with the city and the county, working together, worked so hard in my life. And unfortunate, sometimes the tenor suggests otherwise, but I just want to double down on the fact that there was a handful of people that kept the floor of this valley up since COVID began, which is literally about 2 years ago now, and you have our gratitude. Ragan, the city also took additional steps to protect renters during COVID. Not only did you do the partnership work that Consuelo mentioned, but you set up eviction centers and you provided legal, or you funded or helped to partner to provide legal aid. What would you like to say about that time? And also, what are you worried about?
You know, even I think as Consuelo said, but even before COVID, we know that there are so many families and households in our region that pay far too much for rent. And so they have no space to save for when emergencies come up. And I think so many households in our area are just one unforeseen emergency away from losing their housing. And that is really people of the lowest incomes and disproportionately people of color. And I think the pandemic just simply accelerated that emergency. And so from the beginning of the pandemic, the city really has prioritized helping those who are most vulnerable to COVID-19. We had foundational values that really were driving our work, which were invest in the most vulnerable, partner with community, and empower community with resources to build resiliency. And that was really, again, those foundations that really were driving our work. We were, I think, the first city in the nation to enact an eviction moratorium back in March of 2020, when really we were still learning so much about COVID-19, but we knew that so many people were going to be out of work. We also in 2020 quickly dedicated more than 25 million to emergency rental assistance, again, with that network of partners, Destination Home and the county, and so many partners. And then in 2021, with the Federal Appropriations Act, we saw this huge infusion of emergency rental assistance. And not only did we partner to distribute those funds, but we also opened 2 eviction prevention help centers, one at City Hall and one in East San Jose. Those centers are still open and still offering assistance to households who need to complete a rental assistance application. We've also partnered with Law Foundation and Bay Area Legal Aid to provide legal assistance and education on site. It's really sad, you guys, but we have households that come in that are truly scared they may get a text from their landlord that said, you're being evicted, and they've never been properly noticed, but households are so scared that we're seeing households just self-evict and move out. And so that's really what we're trying to prevent with our legal assistance providers by providing tenants that education to know and understand their rights. Our 2 centers have assisted over 14 households in just the last 6 months, 64% of which we assisted in Spanish. We've also focused a lot on really targeted community outreach in very specific low-income neighborhoods. For example, we've partnered with the county's community health and business engagement teams to do literal door-to-door knocking with information about rental assistance. We've also hosted over 150 what we call pop-up rental assistance clinics in prioritized neighborhoods that have been impacted by COVID-19. And I think this is just this massive effort with city, county, destination home, and our 70 plus partners, I think has really prevented what could have been a just catastrophic wave of households falling into homelessness.
Yeah, I think it ended up being like 85 million or something that went through all of those 70 organizations. I mean, it's wild numbers. It's pretty amazing. Let's talk about the other strategy of our community plan, interim housing, crisis response, meeting the basic needs of people that are homeless. Ragan, the city of San Jose has really been a leader on making investments to provide interim housing. Why are we doing that? What has been the motivation for doing that now? And what's the role that you see it playing as it relates to the overall strategy to end and prevent homelessness?
So, I think the pandemic has really been the great accelerator, giving us this opportunity to work together in new ways towards both short and long-term solutions. And expanding interim and emergency solutions is just one key part of the community plan, and the pandemic really afforded this opportunity of financial resources to act boldly. So in the last 3 years, the city has built interim sites. We're at, I think, about 6 now that have provided 365 new temporary beds, which could house up to 473 people on any given night. And we didn't do this alone. It took the mayor's leadership, it took council's leadership, it took private support from folks like Sandhill Property Foundation, Destination Home, All Home. And we're not done yet. We plan to build more. But I would say that interim housing isn't the sole solution. It's an important strategy of addressing the immediate needs of our unsheltered, and it serves as a bridge to permanent housing. Last year, 83 people moved into permanent housing from our interim sites, and many of these sites weren't in operation for the full year, so we expect to see even greater results next year. But again, I think it's just one strategy. I don't think we can take our foot off the gas in terms of building more permanent and deeply affordable housing. The homeless department, our housing department, and I think our system as a whole is really trying to balance this dual priority of expanding our permanent housing stock and expanding emergency and temporary options. And for example, in our recent Measure E spending allocations, we're really trying to strike that balance by still having this commitment to development of extremely low-income housing, homeless prevention, and interim. And I just think the crisis is so big and the problem so complex that we need every tool in the toolbox: policy changes, more affordable housing, and more emergency and interim solutions.
And more money. One of interim projects that I think has been really special in its evolution is that the city has been partnering with the Santa Clara County Lived Experience Advisory Board really since the beginning to both in how it's been visioned and how it will run. Claudine, you've been a key part of that effort. Can you tell us a little bit more about why integrating lived expertise is so critical in any new housing development?
Yes, absolutely. And I wanted to cheer from here as Ragan was talking, because she's absolutely right in that it is one strategy, and it's an example. It's an excellent example of how we're collectively finding new ways to provide the or offers the safety and security that comes from having a home, right, for people that are coming out of encampment. So the people with lived experience it really should be considered as equal partners, right, in the evaluation of and the development and implementation of these solutions that directly affect their lives. I mean, they can't be left out of the plans, to resolving their homelessness. So I think it's one of those things where the words equal partners, I feel like it challenges the power, the power imbalances of the people that make those decisions up at the top. Sometimes we think we know best what people need to resolve their situations, and that's not true. And that's the challenge that I issue right now to all the service providers that are out there that are doing amazing work already, right? The service providers that are operating the existing interim housing projects that we currently have. I mean, it's one thing to offer up a prescribed solution. It's something completely different to factor in the voices of the people that have experienced and are currently experiencing homelessness into that solution. So one of the amazing things that the city has done, the housing department has done, is really work together with our lived experience advisory board to get our feedback and our input in not just the design process, but also in the types of things that we think would facilitate success for someone coming out of an encampment into an emergency interim housing site. So one of those things is really size, right? Size matters. Like, somebody getting into a unit that feels more like a jail cell, they're not going to stay long. We want them to stay, right? Because we want them to be connected to permanent housing, just like Ragan was saying earlier about the victory report on those 80 plus people that were transitioned into permanent housing. Another thing is that we highly suggested was creating connections between people. People experiencing homelessness are just as community oriented as those of us that are sheltered, right? So creating spaces and designing spaces where residents can get together and create community amongst one another, offer support to one another, I think that's very important too. So I commend the work that is already being done by the city, by the service providers, but there's still a lot more to do. And in addition to that challenge I issued earlier, service providers should really consider having people with lived experience on their decision-making bodies, on the boards of directors, on in management teams, right? That really drive the solutions that we need for ending homelessness. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Claudine. Consuelo, in addition to the county's work on Measure A and prevention, you've also been deeply involved in meeting the immediate basic needs of people that are unsheltered, but we still have a long way to go. What's most important to you as we continue to ramp up those efforts?
Thanks, Jen. I mean, there's a ton there, and I appreciate Claudine's comments about taking the experience and the voices of people with lived experience. And I think Pedro Street, so the county is leasing a 90-unit apartment building in the city of San Jose in Willow Glen. We refer to it as Pedro Street, but it's Willow Glen Apartments. And I love this project because I think it's a sign of innovation and partnership, but also some of the things that we heard when we were leasing up Second Street Studios, our first 100% permanent supportive housing in San Jose. And it was, as people are enrolled in a housing program and they are still on the streets, it is a little harder to feel organized. There's a lot of documentation that's required to get somebody enrolled into housing and move into an apartment. And so we saw this gap a few years ago in really helping people that are enrolled get into some form of transition housing, but they already have an exit into permanent housing. And Pedro Street offers that space. So we are taking people that are enrolled in a housing program, specifically in one of our Measure 8 developments. So we are going to celebrate our 1-year anniversary in May. And the reason why it's innovative is because we have a partnership with the Housing Authority. The beauty of the Housing Authority is that they are a moving to work organization, which allows them to create these new programs that don't fit in this little box that's prescribed by HUD. And we were able to create, this interim housing for 30 of the units that are there, specifically tied to the units that they are supporting through a project-based voucher. And in the 10 months that we've been in operation, 72 people have moved into Pedro Street and out into their permanent housing. So some of the projects that come to mind are Quetzal Gardens, Lee Avenue, Calabasas in the city of Santa Clara, and really it's filling this gap in our system. And the other kind of cool things that we're testing there is the time it takes to get through the rental application process. So we are partnering with the John Stewart Company to come up with a universal application. So basically right now, if you are unhoused and you're enrolled in a program, you have to apply to every different apartment building until you're selected in one, right? Or you choose, this is where I want to live. Through this universal application, you'd submit one application and you check off which housing development you want to move into. So bringing people that choice of where they want to live instead of a system prescribing to them where. And that was one of the input that we got from people with lived experiences. I want the choice to go where I want. And also through the Project Welcome Home, people move, and giving people, just like any one of us, the option to move. So all of that we've gathered over the last few years, and Pedro Street has now become this testing ground. So one of the things that we're testing is how do we give people the opportunity to find employment either in our nonprofits or with government. So we're partnering with our social services agency who administers we call it shorthand as PWEX, which is paid work experience. And one of the gifts of the pandemic for us has been the launching of a centralized shelter hotline, where before people were calling different places trying to find a shelter bed. Now they call one centralized number. It takes all of our shelter beds across the county, and we get to coordinate with the Bill Wilson Center is administering the program, also in partnership with the city of San Jose, who's helping to fund it. And we have people with lived experience working the hotline. And it's really giving people the opportunity. I think a lot of times there's this belief that you don't need to work, or it's a false narrative to think that somebody that has some level of disability is unable to or unwilling to work. And we don't do people justice by making that assumption. I really appreciate Claudine's comment about no one person is the same, right? And no one person's needs are the same. And really it's how do you create programs and systems that are responsive to that and not create these boxes where people have to fit in. And so that's really the work that we're doing is in these testing grounds and with the hotline, and encouraging that as a requirement of our funding moving forward, that people hire people with lived experience, and it is an obligation under their contract.
That actually, I love that so much. Let's take a minute and look ahead. I wanted to share, we've talked a lot about what the public sector leadership and what the public sector is doing. Wanted to share a couple things that have, I think, ways of thinking about how to use money coming out of the pandemic and things that really are appropriate for the philanthropic or private sector. Can you go to the next slide? So two things that we have been working on at Destination Home. One is capacity building for our community partners. One of the things that we heard loud and clear over the last couple of years is that small organizations, especially organizations led by people of color or people with lived expertise don't get funding. They have a hard time getting traditional funding, and that means they have a hard time growing. So we decided to use some of our resources to put $1.8 million into 6 organizations to provide really unrestricted funding for them to do the things that they know that they need to do to expand their efforts to better serve our community. And then another innovation that is happening around the state and the country. The County of Santa Clara has been doing a guaranteed income pilot. The city of Mountain View is going to be doing one, but we are also doing one in partnership with the Si Se Puede Collective, which is really targeting families. And again, in worrying about families and their ability to pay their rent, what if we just provided direct cash assistance with no strings attached to families? And so we'll be kicking off an effort to do this with 150 families that live in Santa Clara County, either extremely low income families that are currently homeless or at risk of homelessness or are housing insecure. I'd like to go back to the panel. We're of course close to being out of time. I want to make sure we can answer. There's a question in the chat, but I'd like to ask each of you to do 2 things. I'd like you we'll go around the room and we'll ask you to share something first that is exciting that you're working on. And then the other is, what is one key barrier or challenge that we have to tackle in the coming year in order to keep making progress? And Preston, I'll start with you. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I used some of my time. I said, starting with DEI, we have to be much more intentional with the use of our resources to overcome the disparities that have been created through government actions and the embedding of racism within policies. I think we have to be, as a housing authority, more creative with our move to work ideas. You heard Consuelo talk about the alternative funding support that we're doing, but we got to continue to think about ways that we can be really supportive with our move to work powers. I think we have to increase resources. Our housing choice voucher program has only grown by 6% over the last 20 years. We have 17,000 vouchers. We have 1,000 vouchers turn every year. We have 40,000 people on the interest list, so it'll take 40 years to serve those on the interest list. We have 300,000 income qualified families in this community, so it'll take even longer. So we have to increase resources. And then the last is around evaluation. You heard Claudine talk about size of the units, as well as Consuelo talking about improving efficiency of operations. We've got to evaluate and really ask the question, how do we as a housing authority deliver our services better to our community?
Thanks, Preston. Let's go to Ragan.
And I would say what we'll be working on in the next 6 months is definitely protecting our most vulnerable households through tenant protections and rental assistance, especially with protections ending at the end of the month. And then I think, you know, I would say, maybe this is me dreaming, but I would say resuscitate the Build Back Better bill, which had, you know, historic investments in homelessness and affordable housing.
Support Senator Padilla's housing bill.
Consuelo?
Thanks, Jen. I have 2 things I'm excited about. One is we have launched a revamp of our coordinated entry system and looking at the way that we measure vulnerability. And the beauty of that is the voices of those with lived experience is at the forefront, where they're guiding the conversation in a way that we haven't before. So it isn't just about talking, like about lifting voices up, it's actually giving the power back. So I'm particularly excited about that. And then last year we launched the Heading Home campaign, which is focused on ending family homelessness. And I think that's bringing a new opportunity to coordinate with various county departments, the state, and really come up with some cool new strategies that can be replicated by other communities.
Last word, Claudine, goes to you.
All right, thank you, Jan. So one of the things I'm excited about is LEAB really expanding outreach efforts. I really feel like outreach gives us an opportunity to create those connections that helps us form strong relationships with people that are out there, and it makes it easier to engage with them, right? To get them thinking about moving into more permanent solutions. The number two thing is people experiencing homelessness are up to 11 times more likely to be arrested and to be criminalized. And I really think that this is an area where we need to do a lot more work, right? People just don't feel like they belong anywhere, right? And their law enforcement is making them feel even more so that way. So there's solutions out there. Some of them are innovative and creative, but they're out there and we need to chase after those solutions. Thank you.
I would say that hearing you all talked about lived expertise, and while this should have been the practice our entire lives, the fact that we are so embracing shifting power and that is happening in the public sector as well, is it really a testimony, Claudine, to you and the leadership of our lived experience advisory board, and it's just really great. So thank you. And thank you all, panelists, for taking the time to talk about where we're at and how the system is functioning. And Chelsea, I'm going to ask, is there any questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, we have two questions here. One that's kind of two-pronged. It's asking about, how someone can learn more about the interior makeup of some of the affordable housing developments. Are there online resources where they can see the interior of these developments? And also, how do they differ, in meeting maybe interim needs as opposed to permanent long-term needs? I might start with Consuelo. Do you have any suggestions for someone to learn more about that?
Yes, I think if you visit the Office of Supportive Housing website and select the housing bond, subcategory, there's a map of all of our supportive housing across the county. And if you click on it, it'll take you to the project's website and you can see the interior and exterior.
Thank you, Consuelo. You said there was one more, Chelsea?
Yeah, there is. So the Governor Newsom has just announced a new initiative, Care Court, and we are getting a question about that and the panel's thoughts on that. I might start with Consuelo as well to talk a little bit about this.
Sure. I think it's a little early to talk too much about it, but just to add that Judge Manley is here locally, and he has been very active in this space. And so I think the fact that he was part of that conversation with the governor's office is a good sign, both for us locally, but I think the opportunity statewide to replicate what he's been able to achieve here is really, really great for us.
Are there any others?
Those are the questions that I see here.
Well, and it is 1:01, which I'm actually astounded. Good job, y'all, that we did this in an hour. And I'd like to thank everyone who hung in there with us. This isn't the end. This is just one opportunity to share information. If you have questions, if you want to meet, if you want to get more involved, you can reach out through Destination Home. We can connect you to anybody who's here if you aren't sure how to reach somebody. And I just want to thank everyone, both for your work every single day and also for being part of a system movement that is committed to getting as many people off the streets as possible and keeping as many people from becoming homeless as possible. So thanks, everybody.